Imagine a single law, passed back in 1926, that did more than just change a few rules. Imagine a law that tried to completely redefine the very soul of a new nation. This wasn't just some legal update. It was a revolution from the top down. Today, we're going to unpack how the Turkish Civil Code became the blueprint for modern Turkey. Okay, let's get into it.
To really get your head around how massive this change was, you have to understand the pure chaos it replaced. In the last days of the Ottoman Empire, justice wasn't just blind, it was completely bewildered. There was no single unified legal system. The law that applied to you could change depending on your religion, your nationality, or even what city you happened to be in. Seriously, a judge's decision in Istanbul could be the total opposite of one in Izmir. This was a system of, well, impossible dualism, where getting justice was basically a roll of the dice.
And hey, just for a second, if you're enjoying this, please don't forget to subscribe to the channel, click that notification bell, and share and like my videos. All the info here was put together from open sources. Okay, thank you.
So, here's how we're going to break this whole story down. First, we'll dive into that law of luck and see why a change was so desperately needed. Then, we'll explore the radical new philosophy behind it, the secular Manifesto. After that, we'll find out how they landed on the Swiss solution. Then comes the big one, the massive social impact, the earthquake it created. And finally, we'll reflect on its complicated, engineered legacy.
Okay, let's start right there, in that legal chaos. The founders of the new Turkish Republic looked at the old Ottoman system and saw something that just could not work for a modern country. It was completely unsustainable.
I mean, just look at how fragmented everything was. You had the capitulations, which basically meant foreigners could get away with things because they were exempt from local laws. Then you had the Millet System, where every religious community, Greek, Armenian, Jewish, had its own separate legal code for huge life events like marriage and inheritance. And the main Ottoman Civil Code, the Mishel, it was this massive 1,851-article document that somehow almost completely ignored family law, the very foundation of society. The result? Pure judicial chaos.
And this right here. This shows you the fundamental philosophical shift they were going for. The whole goal was to transform the Taba, a subject whose life was dictated by the Sultan and religious law, into a yurttaş, a citizen with universal rights. It was a total redefinition of identity. Your rights would no longer be based on what religious group you belonged to. Instead, you were an equal stakeholder in a new, secular nation.
So where did such a radical idea even come from? Well, it was all driven by this new philosophy, a kind of secular manifesto for a new nation, championed by thinkers like the Minister of Justice, Mahmut Esat Bozkurt.
This quote from the official justification of the new code really cuts right to the chase. The reformers were making a bold argument. You cannot build a modern, unified nation on a foundation of competing religious laws. It's just not possible. Bozkurt's vision was even more radical. He believed that basing laws on religion would inevitably destroy national unity because it forces the state to make different rules for every single faith. This whole philosophy got baked into the Turkish concept of Laiklik. Now, this isn't just the separation of church and state as you might think of it. It's an active constitutional principle that says the state will not be governed by religious rules, period. This was the ideological engine for the entire revolution.
Okay, so the philosophy is set. They know what they want to do. But you can't just invent an entire legal code from thin air. So where do you get one? The answer, pretty surprisingly, was Switzerland. This became known as the Swiss solution. And that's a totally fair question, right? I mean, they could have picked from any of the big legal systems in Europe, so why a small, neutral country like Switzerland? Well, it turns out it was an incredibly practical choice. They looked at their options. The French code, a bit too old, considered outdated. The German code, super detailed, but way too technical and abstract. But the Swiss Civil Code was the newest one in Europe. It was simple, it was clear, it was modern, and it was democratic. It was written to be understood by ordinary people, not just a handful of legal scholars. It was the perfect fit. Now, adopting this new code wasn't just some quiet administrative change. The effect it had on Turkish society was immediate, and it was seismic. It was, in a single Turkish word, a zelzele, an earthquake. Zelzele. That one word just perfectly captures the shockwave this sent through a very traditional, very patriarchal social order. For hundreds of years, life had been governed by one set of rules. And then, practically overnight, all of those rules were just gone.
And nowhere was this earthquake felt more deeply than in the lives of women.
The new civil code abolished polygamy. It gave women equal rights to file for divorce. For the very first time, daughters inherited property on the same terms as sons. This law literally transformed women from subjects into citizens, freeing them from what the reformers themselves called the slavery of the old system and making them equal partners in the new republic.
And check this out. This legal revolution directly paved the way for political equality. Look at this timeline. Just 8 years after getting equal rights in the Civil Code, Turkish women won the right to vote and run for office in 1934. That's years before women in places like France or Italy. By 1937, there were 18 women serving in the Turkish parliament.
But a change this big, this fast, and one that came from the top down was always going to create some friction. And this brings us to the really complex legacy of this enormous social engineering project. The historian Ilber Ortaylı puts it so well here. The family is one of the most conservative, deeply rooted parts of any society. So when the state comes in and tries to radically re-engineer it with a law, you're going to get resistance. And this law, which touched everything from marriage to divorce to inheritance, absolutely faced a deep and lasting pushback from parts of society that just weren't ready for such a sudden change.
So, the big takeaway is that while law can be an incredibly powerful tool for building a new national identity, it can't just erase deeply held cultural beliefs overnight. The 1926 Civil Code absolutely created a new legal and social world, especially for women, but it also highlights this timeless tension, leaving us with a final, really powerful question. Can a society truly be reshaped by law alone, or does culture always get the last word?